Wow. Holy crap. Oh my god. I don't know if you can hear the crunch. Holy shit. This is so worth it. It is delicious.
Holy crap.
Oh god.
That thing slaps. What the hell?
They called it a crime against food before the powdered sugar even settled. But what happens when the ridiculous American fare snack suddenly tastes better than expected? Deep-fried Oreos look like everything critics warn about America. Oversized, indulgent, unapologetic. Yet one bite can flip the whole argument. Maybe the real question is not why Americans fry Oreos, but why something this simple, playful, and unforgettable keeps winning people over. The Oreo plot twist. An Oreo goes into hot oil at an American state fair and somehow comes out looking like the kind of decision Europeans are trained to distrust on sight. A cookie already filled with sweet cream gets wrapped in batter, fried until golden, dusted with powdered sugar, and served warm enough to soften the center. On paper, it sounds excessive. In practice, that excess is exactly where the charm begins. For many European visitors, especially those arriving in the United States during the 2026 World Cup, this kind of food can clash with the version of America they have heard about for years. International headlines often reduce American eating to giant portions, fast food, sugar, grease, and health warnings. That picture is easy to understand from a distance, but a county fair is a terrible place for stereotypes to stay organized. Once the lights come on, the rides start moving, and somebody hands you a freshly fried Oreo on a paper tray, the conversation changes from nutrition policy to something much more human. Curiosity. That difference matters because deep-fried Oreos are not really everyday American food. Nobody is suggesting that families in Ohio wake up on Tuesday morning and fry a sleeve of cookies before work. This belongs to fair culture, the same way certain foods in Europe belong to festivals, markets, and special occasions. In Munich, Oktoberfest is tied to giant pretzels, roast chicken, sausages, and beer halls. In Belgium, fairgrounds and winter markets are associated with waffles, fries, and warm sweets. Spain has churros that make perfect sense beside a festival crowd, but would look slightly ambitious next to a laptop at 9 in the morning. America simply takes that festival instinct and gives it a bigger engine. At a state fair, the question is rarely, would this make a sensible Wednesday lunch? The question is closer to, can we fry it, put it on a stick, and make somebody grin before they reach the Ferris wheel? That playful attitude is one of the easiest parts of American culture to misunderstand from overseas. It can look like culinary chaos when viewed through a headline. Standing inside the fair, surrounded by families, livestock barns, music, rides, contests, and food stands, it feels less like chaos and more like permission to have fun. The Oreo itself explains why the skepticism often disappears after one bite. Frying changes the familiar cookie completely. The batter becomes crisp outside while the Oreo inside softens into something closer to warm chocolate cake with melted cream in the middle. Powdered sugar lands on top like the food vendor has decided subtlety can take the afternoon off. It is sweet, ridiculous, temporary, and perfectly suited to a place where a Ferris wheel is glowing behind you and someone nearby is carrying a lemonade roughly the size of a flower vase. That may be the real surprise for visitors who arrive expecting the bleak version of America they have absorbed through screens. The country they meet at a fair is social, playful, generous with portions, and remarkably comfortable letting ordinary people enjoy something simply because it is fun. Deep-fried Oreos will never settle a serious debate about American food, and they were never meant to. They do something far more modest and, in their own sugary way, more persuasive. They turn suspicion into a smile before the powdered sugar has even left your shirt. Pork gets a handle. There are meals you sit down for, and then there is the Iowa State Fair, where somebody looked at a thick pork chop and apparently decided the missing ingredient was a handle. The result is one of those wonderfully American ideas that sounds like a joke until you realize it solves an actual problem. How do you eat a serious piece of meat while walking past cattle barns, carnival games, tractor displays, and several thousand other people doing exactly the same thing? Put it on a stick. The pork chop on a stick is worth talking about because it reveals something deeper about American fair food that outsiders can easily mistake for pure excess. State and county fairs grew from agricultural communities, so the food often behaves like the environment around it. It is sturdy, portable, generous, and designed for people who are moving. You're not supposed to straighten a linen napkin across your lap and wait for a waiter to explain the sauce. You grab the chop by the bone, keep walking, and somehow dinner becomes compatible with a Ferris wheel. That practicality makes even more sense in Iowa. According to USDA livestock data, Iowa consistently holds the largest hog inventory of any US state. accounting for roughly 1/3 of the nation's hogs in recent years. Pork there's not some random carnival gimmick dreamed up beside a deep fryer. It comes directly from a state whose agricultural identity has been tied to hog farming for generations. The fair simply takes something deeply local and makes it walkable. That is a very different relationship with festival food from what visitors may recognize in parts of Europe. At Munich's Oktoberfest, roast chicken, sausages, and pork dishes are traditionally enjoyed around long communal tables inside enormous beer tents. In Spain, major fiestas may fill streets with food stalls, yet meals such as paella still carry the social rhythm of stopping, gathering, and sharing. American state fairs often operate at another speed. Here, your lunch needs to keep up with you because there is a livestock competition at one end of the grounds and a demolition derby somewhere in the opposite direction. And this is where the humble stick becomes almost comically important. Americans have turned fairground portability into its own little engineering department. Corn dogs, pork chops, cheese, pickles, cheesecake, and occasionally foods that have absolutely no business approaching a wooden skewer have all been adapted for one-handed eating. If NASA designed lunch for somebody carrying a stuffed bear in one hand and 3 ride tickets in the other, it might look suspiciously similar. Yet beneath the humor is something genuinely appealing. The pork chop on a stick connects farming, regional pride, and entertainment without making a speech about any of them. Iowa raises pork, families come to the fair, producers serve what the state does well, and visitors eat it while wandering through the place that celebrates the people who produced it. That is why American fair food becomes so memorable. The best dishes are rarely random piles of calories. They carry geography with them. A pork chop with a built-in handle may look wonderfully ridiculous from across the Atlantic, but after one afternoon at an American fair, eating dinner with both feet still moving starts to feel strangely sensible. Butter goes rogue. Somewhere in Texas, butter stopped being an ingredient and demanded top billing. That sentence sounds like a setup to a joke, except the State Fair of Texas actually gave America deep-fried butter. One of those fairground inventions that makes perfect sense only after you understand what American fairs are really doing. This is less about hunger than curiosity. Nobody wanders into Fair Park thinking, I desperately need a stick of butter for lunch. The attraction is discovering whether somebody can take an ordinary refrigerator staple, completely ignore its job description, and turn it into something people will talk about all afternoon. That experimental streak has become part of the fair itself. The State Fair of Texas launched its Big Tex Choice Awards in 2005, turning new fair foods into an annual competition. In 2009, Abel Gonzalez Jr.'s deep-fried butter won the award for Most Creative. The dish used whipped butter that was frozen, wrapped in dough, fried, then finished with toppings. In other words, Texas managed to make butter wear a winter coat before sending it into a deep fryer. And that tells you something unusually charming about American fair culture. Novelty here is treated almost like a competitive sport. Many famous European food celebrations lean toward protecting recognizable traditions. Munich's Oktoberfest serves foods whose appeal comes partly from familiarity. Roast chicken, pretzels, sausages, and pork dishes that generations of visitors already know. In France, regional fêtes frequently celebrate a particular local product, whether cheese, wine, oysters, or chestnuts, with the ingredient's identity remaining front and center. There is beauty in that approach because the pleasure comes from continuity. An American state fair often asks a completely different question. What have you invented this year? That tiny shift changes everything. Vendors compete for attention in a place where hundreds of smells, signs, and sounds are fighting for the same pair of eyes. A plain serving of butter has no chance against a Ferris wheel. Deep-fried butter, however, can stop somebody halfway to the livestock pavilion because the brain needs a few seconds to confirm that it heard correctly. This may also explain why fair foods become so addictive as an experience, even when people would never eat them regularly. The reward begins before the first bite. There is suspense in ordering something you cannot quite picture, watching it arrive, passing it around, comparing reactions, and then deciding whether the madness actually worked. Psychologists often describe novelty as a powerful driver of attention and reward. American fairs have essentially turned that human instinct into an edible midway. The genius is that nobody pretends this belongs in the weekly grocery basket. That would ruin the joke. Deep-fried butter works because the fair has boundaries. A few summer days, bright lights, crowded walkways, paper trays, and permission to try something you would never make at home. Its rarity gives it value in the same way cotton candy somehow tastes better when there is a carousel nearby. There is something deeply likable about a culture confident enough to let food be playful. America already has serious regional cuisines, family recipes, and culinary traditions worth protecting. The state fair simply gives invention its own playground, complete with judges, ribbons, and enough hot oil to frighten a cardiologist from 2 counties away. Europe may preserve a beloved recipe because history has already proved it deserves to survive. At an American fair, somebody is still busy inventing the recipe people might be talking about tomorrow. Fried Coca-Cola, a cup of Coca-Cola, already knows exactly what its job is. It arrives cold, fizzes politely, disappears beside a burger, and has spent more than a century being one of the most recognizable drinks on Earth. Then an American fair vendor looked at that perfectly successful career and decided Coca-Cola should probably learn how to become solid, survive a fryer, and wear whipped cream. That is how you get fried Coca-Cola, one of the most gloriously specific creations associated with the State Fair of Texas. The idea came from fair food inventor Abel Gonzalez Jr., who introduced fried Coke at the 2006 State Fair of Texas. It won the Big Tex Choice Award for Most Creative, and contemporary reports said tens of thousands of servings were sold during the fair. The actual dish was not a can of soda lowered into hot oil, thankfully, because even Texas has paperwork. Coca-Cola flavored batter was fried into small pieces and served with Coke syrup, whipped cream, cinnamon sugar, and a cherry. The interesting part is not that Americans figured out how to fry soda. The interesting part is why a fair rewards somebody for attempting it in the first place. European food festivals often build excitement around origin. In Parma, the identity of Parmigiano Reggiano matters because the cheese is tied to place, production rules, and tradition. Munich's Oktoberfest is powerful partly because visitors expect certain familiar tastes when they arrive. Belgian beer festivals celebrate breweries, styles, and methods that people may have followed for generations. There is pleasure in knowing exactly what something is supposed to be. A major American state fair can create excitement by doing nearly the opposite. It takes something everybody already recognizes and asks vendors to make it unfamiliar again. Coca-Cola is almost the perfect ingredient for that trick. The company says its products are sold in more than 200 countries and territories, so a European visitor is unlikely to need an introduction to the flavor. The surprise comes from context. A drink that normally belongs in a glass has suddenly become something you eat with a fork while carnival lights flash behind you. Your brain recognizes the name before it understands the plate, which is probably half the fun. That combination of familiarity and novelty is powerful. Completely unfamiliar food can make people cautious, while something too familiar barely earns a second glance. Fried Coca-Cola sits right in the middle. You already know Coke, so curiosity has a safety net. The fair simply turns the dial until the familiar becomes strange enough to demand a taste. It is the culinary equivalent of seeing your accountant arrive at a 4th of July parade riding a mechanical bull. You recognize the person, you simply have several follow-up questions. This also reveals why state fair food has such extraordinary storytelling value. People rarely go home talking enthusiastically about the completely sensible sandwich they ate at noon. They remember the moment somebody said, "They fried Coca-Cola," because the sentence itself needs an explanation. The food becomes a souvenir before you have even finished eating it. That willingness to play with beloved brands and familiar flavors feels especially American. There is confidence in taking an icon that everyone knows and giving it a temporary fairground personality, knowing perfectly well that the original will still be waiting in the refrigerator tomorrow. Fried Coca-Cola was never trying to improve Coca-Cola. Its real achievement was much more fun. For one afternoon at the fair, it made one of the most familiar tastes in America feel brand new again. Deep-fried cheese curds. Some fair foods announce themselves with neon colors and enough powdered sugar to leave fingerprints on your shirt. Deep-fried cheese curds are sneakier. They arrive in a plain paper basket looking almost suspiciously ordinary, and then one bite produces the combination that has kept Midwestern fairgoers reaching back into that basket for decades. A thin, salty crunch followed immediately by warm cheese that stretches, squeaks, and somehow disappears faster than anybody intended. This time, the interesting story has very little to do with outrageous invention. It is about freshness, something European visitors may not expect to find hiding beside carnival rides and livestock barns. Cheese curds are young pieces of cheddar before they have been pressed and aged into a finished block. Fresh curds have a famously springy texture and can make a little squeaking sensation against the teeth because their protein structure is still tight. That characteristic fades as the curds age, which means the experience is tied directly to how recently they were made. At fairs across Wisconsin and the upper Midwest, frying those fresh curds creates a clever contrast. The outside becomes crisp and hot, while the cheese underneath stays soft, elastic, and pleasantly salty. Wisconsin is exactly the sort of place where that matters. The state produces roughly a quarter of all cheese made in the United States and has long made more cheese than any other state. Wisconsin cheesemakers produce hundreds of varieties, styles, and types, so seeing cheese curds at a fair is about as surprising as seeing barbecue smoke in Texas. They belong there because dairy farming and cheesemaking are part of the region's everyday identity. That makes the comparison with Europe surprisingly interesting. Walk through a market in Amsterdam and cheese is often presented in large wheels, carefully cut wedges, and mature varieties whose age is part of their appeal. In France, cheeses such as Comté can spend months developing flavor before reaching a counter. British cheddar may mature for many months or even years. Across much of Europe, aging often adds prestige because time is expected to deepen flavor. The Midwestern cheese curd proudly goes the other direction. Its bragging right is practically, "This thing barely had time to grow up." Then America covers it in batter and fries it. There is something wonderfully unpretentious about that. A food with a genuine connection to local agriculture does not need a polished tasting room or a waiter describing grassy notes from the pasture. At a state fair, it comes in a paper basket, perhaps beside ranch dressing, while somebody nearby is trying to win an oversized stuffed animal by throwing rings at bottles. The reason the curds are so easy to keep eating is also beautifully simple. Your mouth gets crisp batter, salt, warm dairy fat, and elastic cheese in the same bite, while every piece is small enough to make the next one seem harmless. A giant dessert announces that you have made a commitment. A cheese curd behaves more like popcorn during a movie. You keep reaching for another until somebody discovers the basket has mysteriously become empty. European cheese culture shows what patience can do to milk. Wisconsin fair culture shows what can happen when cheese is eaten young, fried immediately, and shared while it is still hot enough to squeak. Both traditions know cheese remarkably well. America simply figured out that sometimes the best cheese plate comes in a paper basket beside a Ferris wheel. Funnel cake. Funnel cake looks like someone dropped a ball of yarn into a fryer, covered the evidence with powdered sugar, and somehow created one of the most beloved smells at an American fairground. There is no neat slice, no elegant filling, and absolutely no concern for whether the finished product will survive a white shirt. Yet that messy pile of fried batter explains something Europeans often notice very quickly at state and county fairs. American fair food is designed to turn eating into part of the entertainment. The appeal begins before anyone tastes it. Batter is poured in looping streams directly into hot oil, crossing over itself until a loose web becomes a golden disc. Watching it form is almost as satisfying as eating it because the customer can see the whole transformation happen in seconds. At a fair packed with flashing signs and moving rides, even dessert understands that it has to put on a show. That idea has deep roots. Funnel cake style fried dough is closely associated with Pennsylvania Dutch communities and became firmly embedded in American fair and festival culture during the 20th century. The Pennsylvania Dutch themselves trace much of their heritage to German-speaking immigrants, which makes the European comparison especially funny. Germany gave America generations of fried dough traditions, and America eventually replied by making the portion roughly the diameter of a dinner plate and burying it under enough powdered sugar to identify every person who touched it. The addictive part is texture rather than sheer sweetness. The thin strands around the edges become brittle and crisp, while thicker crossings stay softer and slightly chewy. Every bite is different, so the brain never quite gets the same mouthful twice. Food researchers have long recognized that contrasting textures increase sensory interest, and funnel cake practically turns that principle into fairground architecture. One section snaps like a thin cookie, the next bends like fresh dough, and 5 minutes later, the paper plate resembles the aftermath of a very small snowstorm. That experience feels different from classic European pastry culture. Walk into a patisserie in Paris, and visual precision is part of the pleasure. Pastries are lined up like they have an appointment with a photographer. Vienna has torts and strudels built around careful layers, while Belgian waffles arrive with recognizable grids that politely suggest where the next bite should begin. Funnel cake offers no such guidance. You tear off whichever piece looks promising and negotiate the rest with your fingers. That informality fits the American fair perfectly. State fairs are places where livestock competitions can sit beside roller coasters, agricultural displays beside concerts, and a family can spend the afternoon moving between traditions that are generations old and attractions installed last week. Funnel cake behaves the same way. Its roots are old, but the experience feels immediate, casual, and communal. There's also something wonderfully American about refusing to make the portion precious. People pull pieces from the same plate, pass it around, laugh when powdered sugar lands somewhere inconvenient, and keep walking. The dessert becomes a shared event rather than something anyone needs to eat gracefully. A Paris pastry may invite you to admire the chef's control. Funnel cake hands you a paper plate full of delicious chaos and quietly reminds you that sometimes the best part of a fair is getting a little sugar on your shirt. Giant turkey legs. A giant turkey leg at an American fair does something very few foods can manage. It makes a grown adult look like they have temporarily joined a medieval banquet without leaving the midway. One hand is wrapped around a bone almost the length of a forearm, the meat is smoky enough to perfume the air several yards away, and suddenly a normal lunch has the visual presence of something that should arrive with trumpets. That scale is exactly why the dish deserves its own category. American fair food has always understood something that many restaurants carefully avoid admitting. People eat with their eyes long before their mouths get involved. A turkey leg is already naturally dramatic because the bone gives it height, weight, and a recognizable shape. Fair vendors amplify that advantage by serving the whole thing intact, often smoked until the outside turns deep brown and glossy. Compared with a paper tray of small bites, it has the subtlety of a pickup truck parked beside a bicycle. You can spot one moving through a crowd before you know where the stand is. At a major American fair, that matters. The Minnesota State Fair, for example, drew more than 2.1 million visitors in 2019, setting an attendance record. When thousands of people are moving through the grounds at once, food is competing with livestock shows, giant slides, concerts, carnival rides, and vendors yelling across packed walkways. A dish that can advertise itself simply by being carried past you has a serious advantage. The psychology is almost embarrassingly effective. One person buys a giant turkey leg, another person sees it from 20 feet away, and suddenly a food order has become free advertising with barbecue sauce on it. You do not need a billboard when your customer is already walking around holding the billboard by the bone. That visual culture feels quite different from many traditional European food settings. In Madrid, a plate of jamón ibérico earns attention through thin slicing, marbling, and craftsmanship. In Lyon, sausages and charcuterie are often presented as part of a meal where flavor and origin carry much of the prestige. German Christmas markets certainly know the power of a substantial bratwurst, but even there, the sausage usually sits politely inside bread rather than resembling something a Viking might use to negotiate a parking dispute. The American fare has fewer concerns about looking polite, and that is part of what makes it so much fun. A giant turkey leg turns size into theater without needing complicated decoration. The first appeal is visual, but the eating experience backs it up. Smoking gives the meat a deep, savory aroma. The exterior develops concentrated flavor, and the interior stays substantial enough that the meal takes time to finish. You are carrying something that feels closer to a prop from a movie set. Yet it is still recognizably simple food. Meat, smoke, salt, and patience. That simplicity separates it from the more experimental fare creations. Nobody needed to invent a strange chemical combination or teach dessert how to survive a fryer. The trick was understanding presentation. America took a familiar piece of meat and realized that leaving it gloriously oversized could become the attraction. There's also a social side to the spectacle. Large fair foods invite comments from strangers in a way ordinary meals rarely do. Somebody sees the turkey leg and asks where it came from. Another person laughs at the size. Children stare at it as though someone has just returned from hunting a dinosaur behind the Ferris wheel. The food becomes part of the atmosphere because everyone can recognize the joke from across the walkway. That is a very American kind of confidence. If something is going to be memorable, there's no reason to whisper about it. European food traditions often prove that refinement can make a simple ingredient feel special. American fare culture demonstrates something equally enjoyable. Sometimes scale, smoke, and a bone big enough to double as a steering wheel can do the same job. And once you have walked through a state fair carrying a turkey leg the size of a small baseball bat, an ordinary sandwich starts looking almost suspiciously underdressed. Maybe that is the real magic of America's state fairs. They take ordinary food, ordinary people, and one summer afternoon, then somehow turn all three into a story worth remembering. Deep-fried Oreos, cheese curds, giant turkey legs, and funnel cake may look outrageous from a distance, but up close they feel joyful, local, and unmistakably American. Which fair food would you try first and which one would you never touch? Tell us below and subscribe for more surprising sides of America.